January 5, 1943. The American light cruiser USS Helena cuts through the morning waters off Guadalcanal under Captain Gilbert Hoover. Her 5-inch anti-aircraft batteries are loaded with the first batch of Mark 32 shells equipped with revolutionary proximity fuses. For 2 years, American naval forces had struggled against Japanese air attacks, using conventional time-fused ammunition that required impossible precision to hit fast-moving aircraft. Now, with a single technological breakthrough finally perfected, the Pacific Air War was about to transform from desperate defense into systematic aerial dominance. The stakes were the survival of Allied naval forces against an enemy that would soon weaponize death itself. The proximity fuse crisis had begun at Pearl Harbor, where the devastating effectiveness of Japanese air attacks exposed the fundamental inadequacy of American anti-aircraft defenses. Traditional anti-aircraft ammunition relied on either direct hits virtually impossible against maneuvering targets or timed fuses that required gunners to predict exactly when and where enemy aircraft would be seconds in the future. Against the speed and agility of modern warplanes, American gunners were firing an average of 2,500 rounds to achieve a single hit. For 18 months, American ships had faced the terrifying reality that Japanese pilots could attack with near impunity during daylight hours. The mathematics of destruction favored the attackers. Conventional anti-aircraft shells created lethal fragments over only 60 square feet, requiring near-perfect timing and accuracy that combat conditions made virtually impossible to achieve. As Helena's gunners prepared for what seemed like another routine Japanese air raid, they carried ammunition that represented America's most closely guarded secret shells, containing miniature radar transmitters that could detect approaching aircraft and detonate automatically at optimal range. The variable time fuse, as it was deceptively named to conceal its true nature, would either revolutionize naval warfare or remain another failed experiment. 4 Japanese Aichi D-3A VAL dive bombers appeared in the dawn sky, having already scored a hit on the New Zealand cruiser HMAS Achilles. As the VALs broke off their attack and began withdrawing, Helena's anti-aircraft gunners almost casually fired 2 salvos of their new ammunition at the departing aircraft. What happened next would change the course of the Pacific War. One of the VALs burst into flames and crashed into the sea, destroyed not by a direct hit, but by a shell that had passed close enough to trigger automatically and fill the air with lethal fragments. For the first time in naval history, an aircraft had been deliberately destroyed by a weapon that aimed itself. The proximity fuse had achieved what conventional ammunition could not: reliable kills against fast-moving aerial targets. But this breakthrough had taken nearly 3 years to perfect, overcoming seemingly impossible technical challenges that had frustrated America's brightest scientists and engineers. The story of how miniaturized radar technology was packed into artillery shells would prove as remarkable as its impact on the war itself. The anti-aircraft crisis facing Allied naval forces was staggering in scope and urgency. By 1943, American ships were firing an average of 2,500 rounds of conventional ammunition to achieve a single aircraft kill, while Japanese pilots pressed home attacks with increasing skill and determination. The fundamental problem lay in the physics of aerial warfare. Aircraft moving at 300+ mph could change position faster than human gunners could calculate firing solutions. Admiral Arleigh Burke, commanding destroyer forces in the Solomon Islands, documented the psychological toll on American crews facing seemingly impossible defensive tasks. "Mechanical time Fuzes, which we had been using, only brought down a plane at night by accident," he recalled. "They were good for harassing enemy aircraft at night, but that was about all." Ships that had once felt confident in their defensive capabilities now operated under constant threat from an enemy that traditional weapons seemed powerless to stop. The strategic implications extended far beyond individual ship losses. Japanese air attacks were forcing American naval units to operate under severe tactical restrictions, limiting offensive operations and requiring massive defensive formations that reduced overall fleet effectiveness. The planned offensive across the Pacific hung in the balance as long as Japanese aircraft could attack Allied ships with relative impunity. Intelligence reports revealed the scope of Japanese preparations for intensified air warfare. Enemy forces were developing increasingly sophisticated attack tactics, including coordinated strikes by multiple aircraft types and specialized dive bombing techniques that maximized damage while minimizing exposure to defensive fire. American naval leaders recognized that without dramatically improved anti-aircraft capabilities, future operations would face prohibitive casualties. The human cost of ineffective anti-aircraft defense was mounting rapidly. Ships that survived Japanese air attacks often suffered devastating casualties from attacks that conventional wisdom suggested should have been prevented. Gun crews who had trained extensively in anti-aircraft procedures found their skills inadequate against the realities of modern aerial warfare, where split-second timing and impossible accuracy determined life or death. Technical analysis of the anti-aircraft problem revealed three fundamental limitations of existing ammunition. Time-fuzed shells required gunners to predict target location several seconds in the future, accounting for both aircraft and shell trajectories. Contact Fuzes demanded direct hits against targets moving at hundreds of miles per hour. Both approaches failed when faced with the unpredictable maneuvering of combat aircraft under skilled pilots. The crisis deepened as Japanese tactical innovation outpaced American defensive improvements. Enemy pilots learned to exploit the weaknesses of conventional anti-aircraft fire, using evasive maneuvers and attack patterns that maximized their survival while minimizing American defensive effectiveness. Ships equipped with the most advanced fire control systems still struggled to achieve meaningful hit rates against determined attackers. Production statistics revealed the economic burden of ineffective anti-aircraft ammunition. American factories were producing hundreds of thousands of shells monthly, yet the vast majority failed to achieve their intended purpose due to fundamental technological limitations rather than manufacturing defects. The waste of resources was staggering, but more importantly, American lives were being lost to problems that technology might solve. The search for solutions had led American scientists to pursue what many considered impossible, creating a shell that could think for itself, detecting nearby aircraft and detonating at precisely the right moment to ensure destruction. The proximity fuse represented the convergence of cutting-edge electronics, precision manufacturing, and desperate military necessity. The proximity fuse concept had its origins in the desperate summer of 1940, when British scientists shared their most advanced research with American colleagues as part of the Tizard mission. Among the technologies presented was a preliminary circuit design for a fuse utilizing radio oscillation to detect nearby targets. The British had recognized the theoretical potential, but lacked the industrial capacity to develop the concept into practical weapons. Dr. Merle Tuve of the Carnegie Institution was assigned leadership of Section T of the National Defense Research Committee, tasked with developing proximity fuses for the U.S. Navy's primary anti-aircraft weapon, the 5-inch 38 caliber gun. The challenge seemed overwhelming, creating a miniature radar system that could survive the massive acceleration forces of artillery firing while remaining sensitive enough to detect aircraft at optimal range. The theoretical foundation was straightforward. A shell-mounted radio transmitter would broadcast signals that would reflect off nearby aircraft. When returned, signals indicated optimal proximity, typically 25 to 75 feet, the fuse would trigger automatically, creating a lethal fragmentation cloud that no aircraft could survive. The practical implementation, however, required solving seemingly impossible engineering challenges. The first major obstacle was creating electronic components that could withstand artillery firing forces. Standard radio tubes shattered under the 20,000 G acceleration forces generated by 5-inch guns, while the centrifugal forces from shell rotation approached 30,000 RPM. Working with Western Electric and Raytheon, engineers modified miniature hearing aid tubes to survive these extreme conditions, but early prototypes still failed at unacceptable rates. Parallel development efforts explored alternative approaches, including optical photoelectric fuses that could detect aircraft through light sensors. However, the optical system was limited to daylight operations and proved vulnerable to weather conditions. The radio proximity method, despite its complexity, offered reliable performance under all combat conditions if the technical challenges could be overcome. By January 1942, the three fuse achieved a 52% success rate against water targets during testing, a performance level the Navy accepted despite the high failure rate. The urgency of wartime requirements demanded deployment of imperfect weapons rather than waiting for ideal solutions. Combat would provide the ultimate test of whether proximity fuse technology could deliver on its revolutionary promise. The first comprehensive test came in August 1942 aboard the newly commissioned USS Cleveland, during shakedown operations in Chesapeake Bay. Gunners engaged 3 radio-controlled drone aircraft with proximity-fuzed ammunition, destroying all targets with just 4 shells. The demonstration was so successful that testing was halted after the first day the Navy had seen enough to authorize full-scale production. Security surrounding the proximity fuse rivaled that of the atomic bomb project. The technology represented such a significant advantage that capture of unexploded shells by enemy forces could compromise the entire program. Initial deployment was restricted to naval operations where duds would fall into deep water, preventing enemy recovery and analysis of the revolutionary technology. The proximity fuse represented more than a technical achievement. It embodied American industrial capability applied to solve specific military problems through systematic engineering rather than brute force. The success or failure of this approach would influence not only the Pacific War but the entire future of technological warfare. Lieutenant Red Cochran commanded the aft 5-inch battery aboard USS Helena during the ship's deployment to the South Pacific in late 1942. Armed with 500 rounds of the experimental Mark 32 proximity-fuzed shells, Helena represented one of only 3 ships initially equipped with the revolutionary ammunition. For Cochran and his gun crews, the proximity fuse was an unproven technology that might revolutionize naval warfare or fail catastrophically when lives depended on it. Helena's combat record already included 2 major night battles against Japanese forces, where her rapid-fire 6-inch guns had helped sink enemy cruisers and destroyers during the fierce fighting around Guadalcanal. Cochran's anti-aircraft crews had experienced the frustration of conventional defensive fire during repeated Japanese air attacks, watching their accurately aimed shells explode harmlessly as enemy aircraft continued their attacks. On the morning of January 5, 1943, 4 Japanese D-3A Val dive bombers attacked the American task force operating near Guadalcanal. The obsolete aircraft had already scored a hit on the New Zealand cruiser HMAS Achilles, demonstrating that even outdated Japanese planes remained dangerous when flown by skilled pilots. As the Vals completed their attack and began withdrawing, Cochran's battery had mere seconds to engage the departing aircraft. Cochran ordered his gunners to fire 3 salvos of proximity-fuzed 5-inch shells at the retreating bombers. The engagement lasted less than 90 seconds, with Helena's crew having little time for precise aim calculation. Traditional gunnery doctrine would have required extensive firing calculations and multiple salvos to achieve even the possibility of a hit against maneuvering targets at that range. The second salvo achieved what months of conventional anti-aircraft fire had failed to accomplish. One of the Japanese Vals burst into flames and crashed into the sea. Unlike previous engagements where near misses produced only spectacular but harmless explosions, the proximity-fuzed shell had detonated at optimal range, filling the air with lethal fragments that no aircraft could survive. The kill represented a transformative moment for Cochran and his crew. For the first time in their combat experience, anti-aircraft shells had functioned as designed, automatically detecting their target and detonating at precisely the right moment to ensure destruction. The psychological impact was immediate. Gunners, who had previously felt helpless against fast-moving aircraft, suddenly possessed weapons that seemed to aim themselves. The success aboard Helena validated months of theoretical development and experimental testing, but it also raised new questions about the proximity fuse's reliability under varied combat conditions. Cochran's crew had achieved the first proximity fuse kill in naval history, yet they understood that one successful engagement did not guarantee consistent performance against different target types and attack patterns. The technical achievement represented by Cochran's successful engagement extended beyond individual marksmanship to demonstrate the potential of electronic guidance systems in warfare. The proximity fuse had eliminated human judgment and mechanical timing from the kill equation, replacing them with automatic target detection that functioned faster and more accurately than any human operator could achieve. Word of Helena's success spread rapidly through the Pacific Fleet, creating demand for proximity-fuzed ammunition that far exceeded initial production capacity. Cochran's crew had proven that electronic warfare was not theoretical, it was practical, deadly, and would transform naval combat throughout the remainder of the Pacific War. The development of reliable proximity Fuzes faced 3 fundamental technical challenges that had to be solved simultaneously: creating electronics that could survive artillery firing, designing detection systems that could distinguish targets from background interference, and manufacturing components precise enough to function reliably under extreme combat conditions. Each problem represented the cutting edge of 1940s technology, and solving all three within wartime deadlines seemed nearly impossible. The first challenge involved creating vacuum tube electronics that could withstand acceleration forces exceeding 20,000 G and rotational forces approaching 30,000 RPM. Standard radio components were designed for stationary operation and shattered instantly under artillery firing conditions. Engineers working with Western Electric and Raytheon had to redesign fundamental electronic components from scratch, modifying miniature hearing aid tubes to survive forces that exceeded anything previously attempted. The second major obstacle was developing radio frequency systems that could operate reliably in the electromagnetic chaos of naval combat. Proximity-fuzes had to function while surrounded by powerful ship radars, radio communications, and electronic jamming attempts. The Doppler effect detection system required precise frequency control to distinguish between target aircraft and background electronic noise, demanding unprecedented precision in miniaturized components. The third systematic problem involved manufacturing tolerances that exceeded existing industrial capabilities. Each proximity fuse contained approximately 130 individual electronic components that had to be assembled with precision measured in thousandths of inches. Mass production of such complex devices demanded new manufacturing techniques and quality control systems that American industry had never attempted on wartime schedules. Testing revealed additional complications that threatened the entire program. Early prototypes achieved only 52% reliability against static targets under ideal conditions, a failure rate the Navy reluctantly accepted due to wartime urgency. In combat conditions, with electronic interference, evasive targets, and stressed equipment, actual performance might be significantly worse than laboratory testing suggested. The directional sensitivity requirements created another layer of complexity. Proximity-fuzes had to be most sensitive perpendicular to the shell's flight path, where fragmentation would be most effective, while remaining insensitive along the shell's axis to prevent premature detonation. This required antenna designs that used the shell itself as a directional transmitter, adding mechanical constraints to already challenging electronic requirements. Security considerations imposed additional restrictions that complicated development and deployment. The proximity fuse represented such advanced technology that any unexploded shells falling into enemy hands could compromise the entire program. This limited testing locations, restricted combat deployment areas, and required special handling procedures that interfered with normal military operations. Cost analysis revealed the enormous financial burden of proximity fuse development. At approximately $50 per shell compared to less than $10 for conventional ammunition proximity, fuses represented one of the most expensive weapons systems ever deployed. The program eventually cost over $1 billion in 1940s currency, involving 87 companies using 110 factories and employing 80,000 workers nationwide. The integration challenge proved equally daunting. Proximity-fuzes had to interface seamlessly with existing 5-inch gun systems, fire control computers, and ammunition handling equipment. Any modification to established naval procedures risked compromising the effectiveness of ship defensive systems that crews had trained extensively to operate under combat conditions. Despite these systematic obstacles, the proximity fuse program represented American industrial capability applied to solve specific military problems through engineering excellence rather than conventional approaches. Success would require coordinating technical innovation, mass production, and combat deployment on a scale never before attempted in wartime conditions. Captain Saburo Nakamura of the Imperial Japanese Navy observed American anti-aircraft capabilities from his position with Combined Fleet Intelligence, analyzing the dramatic change in Allied defensive effectiveness that began appearing in early 1943. Japanese pilots returning from attacks on American ships reported increasingly accurate defensive fire that seemed to explode with uncanny precision near their aircraft, even when shells appeared to miss their targets completely. Nakamura's operational analysis noted patterns that defied conventional understanding of anti-aircraft warfare. American ships were achieving hit rates against Japanese aircraft that exceeded theoretical possibilities for time-fused ammunition, suggesting technological improvements that Japanese intelligence could not identify. More troubling, American defensive fire appeared equally effective during day and night operations, eliminating the tactical advantage that darkness had previously provided to Japanese attackers. Intercepted American communications revealed growing confidence among Allied anti-aircraft crews who had previously demonstrated appropriate caution when engaging Japanese aircraft. Morale reports indicated that American gunners were actively seeking opportunities to engage Japanese aircraft rather than treating air attacks as desperate defensive situations. This psychological transformation suggested fundamental changes in American anti-aircraft capabilities. British naval observers serving with the Royal Navy's Pacific Fleet provided independent assessment of American anti-aircraft improvements. Captain Reginald Pemberton Hughes reported to the Admiralty that American ships were achieving defensive effectiveness that British forces could not match with identical fire control systems and conventional ammunition. The difference appeared to lie in specialized American ammunition that was not being shared with Allied forces. German naval intelligence, through diplomatic channels with Japan, received reports of American supershells that appeared to explode automatically near aircraft without requiring direct hits. German analysts concluded that the Americans had developed some form of proximity detection system, but the technical complexity of implementing such technology in artillery shells was considered beyond current manufacturing capabilities. Japanese pilot debriefings revealed the psychological impact of facing weapons that seemed to pursue aircraft individually. Experienced aviators reported that American anti-aircraft fire had become personally directed, with shells appearing to track and intercept aircraft regardless of evasive maneuvers. Several pilots requested transfer to ground combat units rather than continue facing American naval defenses. Intelligence analysis of captured American equipment revealed sophisticated fire control systems, but failed to identify the source of improved anti-aircraft effectiveness. Japanese technicians examining American 5-inch shells found conventional designs with no obvious modifications that could account for the reported performance improvements. The technology remained invisible to enemy observation. Strategic assessments by Japanese naval planners concluded that American anti-aircraft capabilities had improved to levels that made conventional air attacks increasingly costly and ineffective. The tactical advantage that Japanese aviation had enjoyed early in the Pacific War was being eroded by technological developments that Japanese industry could not match or counter with existing resources. The broader implications for Japanese military strategy became apparent as American anti-aircraft effectiveness continued improving throughout 1943. Conventional air attacks that had previously achieved acceptable success rates were now facing defensive fire so accurate that mission survival was becoming questionable. Japanese aviation units began developing new tactics to cope with American defensive improvements they could not understand or replicate. The external perspective revealed that proximity-fuzed technology was achieving strategic effects beyond its direct military impact, creating psychological pressure on enemy forces and forcing tactical changes that would ultimately lead to even more desperate Japanese innovations in aerial warfare. The initial deployment of proximity fuses in early 1943 achieved immediate tactical success, but revealed significant limitations that prevented widespread adoption. While hit rates improved dramatically from 3% to 37% against Japanese aircraft, production capacity remained insufficient for fleet-wide deployment. More critically, the early Mark 32 fuses suffered from reliability issues that caused 15% failure rates under actual combat conditions. Commander William Sterling Parsons, later famous for arming the atomic bomb aboard Enola Gay, personally shepherded the first 5,000 proximity-fuzed shells to the Pacific theater. The shells were distributed among USS Enterprise, USS Saratoga, and USS Helena, with extensive crew training conducted to maximize the effectiveness of the revolutionary ammunition. Initial combat results exceeded all expectations, despite the limited quantities available. By mid-1943, naval guns had fired 36,370 anti-aircraft rounds in the Pacific theater. Although only 25% used proximity fuses, these accounted for 51% of all Japanese aircraft destroyed by naval gunfire. The new shells created lethal fragment patterns covering 3,000 square feet compared to 60 square feet for conventional ammunition, representing a 50-fold improvement in effective area coverage. The psychological impact on American crews was immediate and profound. Gun crews who had previously felt helpless against Japanese air attacks suddenly possessed weapons that seemed to reach out and destroy aircraft automatically. Morale improvements were measurable across ships equipped with proximity fuzzes, with sailors reporting renewed confidence in their ability to defend their vessels effectively against air attack. Admiral Arleigh Burke, serving as Chief of Staff to Admiral Mark Mitcher commanding the fast carrier task forces, documented the operational transformation. All the 5-inch 38 and 5-inch 25 ammunition was fitted with VT fuses, and as you well know, those fuses knocked down enemy planes by the dozens. Had it not been for those fuses, our ship losses and casualties in the fast carriers in the last half of the war would have been enormously larger. However, manufacturing limitations prevented immediate fleet-wide distribution of proximity-fuzed ammunition. Production required precision assembly of 130 miniaturized electronic components per shell, demanding manufacturing techniques that had never been attempted on wartime scales. Crosley Corporation, RCA, Eastman Kodak, General Electric, and other contractors were producing only 500 units daily by late 1942, far below combat requirements. Security restrictions continued to limit tactical deployment of proximity fuses to operations over deep water, where unexploded shells could not be recovered by enemy forces. These operational constraints reduced the flexibility of proximity fuse employment, particularly during amphibious operations where tactical requirements conflicted with security protocols. Technical improvements emerged from combat experience as engineers analyzed performance data from actual engagements. By late 1943, daily production had increased to approximately 40,000 units as manufacturing techniques improved and additional contractors joined the program. Quality control improvements reduced failure rates while maintaining the precision assembly required for reliable operation. The startling effectiveness of proximity fuses led the Navy to increase their usage from 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition in 1943 to 75% by 1944. Combat commanders who had initially viewed the complex ammunition with skepticism became enthusiastic advocates after witnessing their effectiveness against Japanese air attacks. The partial solution represented by early proximity fuse deployment demonstrated the potential for electronic guidance systems to transform warfare, but also revealed the enormous industrial and logistical challenges involved in implementing revolutionary technology under wartime conditions. By 1944, proximity fuse technology had evolved to address the systematic challenges that limited early deployment effectiveness. Advanced manufacturing techniques developed by the 87 companies and 110 factories involved in production had improved reliability while reducing costs, enabling widespread fleet deployment. Daily production reached 40,000 units, sufficient to supply the expanding Pacific Fleet with proximity-fuzed ammunition for all major operations. The tactical applications of proximity fuses expanded beyond anti-aircraft defense to include pre-invasion bombardment of Japanese-held islands. Shells detonating at predetermined heights above ground created devastating anti-personnel effects over large areas, revolutionizing artillery support for amphibious operations. This dual capability made proximity fuses valuable for both defensive and offensive operations throughout the Pacific Campaign. The effectiveness of proximity fuses against conventional Japanese air attacks contributed to enemy tactical evolution that would prove even more challenging for American defenses. As proximity-fuzed shells made standard bombing and torpedo attacks increasingly costly, Japanese aviation units began developing suicide tactics that would culminate in organized kamikaze operations beginning in October 1944. The success of proximity-fused technology may have inadvertently influenced Japanese development of kamikaze tactics. As conventional air attacks became increasingly ineffective against American anti-aircraft defenses, Japanese commanders recognized that only attacks pressed home to completion could achieve meaningful results. The weapons that had solved the conventional air attack problem contributed to creating an even more dangerous threat. Technical refinements in proximity fuse design addressed earlier reliability issues while maintaining the electronic sophistication required for effective operation. Advanced frequency control systems reduced interference problems, while improved manufacturing tolerances increased the percentage of shells that functioned properly under combat conditions. These improvements maintained American technological advantages as Japanese forces adapted their tactics. The strategic impact of proximity fuse deployment extended beyond direct anti-aircraft effectiveness to influence overall Pacific War operations. American naval forces, equipped with reliable proximity-fuzed ammunition, could operate with reduced escort requirements, allowing offensive forces to be concentrated for major operations rather than dispersed for defensive purposes. Intelligence analysis revealed that Japanese forces had concluded proximity-fuzed technology represented capabilities beyond their industrial capacity to replicate. Captured documents showed that Japanese military planners considered American anti-aircraft improvements to be technologically unattainable with available resources, creating strategic despair about their ability to contest American naval superiority through conventional means. The economic implications of proximity-fuzed success justified the enormous investment in development and production. Cost analysis showed that improved anti-aircraft effectiveness reduced ship losses and casualty rates by margins that exceeded the additional expense of sophisticated ammunition. The technology had achieved strategic objectives through industrial capability rather than numerical superiority. Combat reports from late 1944 documented the complete transformation of American anti-aircraft capabilities achieved through proximity-fuzed deployment. Ships that had previously required extensive defensive formations could now operate independently with confidence in their ability to defeat air attacks. This tactical flexibility accelerated offensive operations throughout the Pacific theater. The deeper solution, represented by mature proximity-fuzed technology, had achieved the original goal of revolutionizing anti-aircraft warfare, but the success created new challenges as enemy forces adapted with increasingly desperate tactics that conventional weapons, even proximity-fuzed shells, would struggle to counter effectively. The ultimate test of proximity-fuzed technology came with the emergence of organized kamikaze attacks beginning in October 1944. Unlike conventional air attacks that could be deterred by accurate defensive fire, suicide pilots were willing to absorb damage that would force normal aviators to abort their missions. This fundamental change in enemy psychology required proximity-fuzes to achieve complete aircraft destruction rather than simply deterrent damage. Kamikaze attacks at the Battle of Leyte Gulf demonstrated both the effectiveness and limitations of proximity-fuzed technology against suicide tactics. While proximity-fuzed shells achieved higher hit rates than conventional ammunition, kamikaze pilots who reached the target area still maintained a 47.4% chance of hitting or damaging Allied ships. The weapons that had revolutionized defense against conventional air attacks faced an enemy that had eliminated self-preservation from tactical calculations. Statistical analysis revealed the challenge facing American anti-aircraft defenses. Kamikaze attacks were 10 times more effective than conventional air attacks, requiring an average of only 3.6 suicide attacks to score a hit compared to 37 conventional bombing attempts. Proximity-fuzes improved defensive effectiveness, but the fundamental advantage of suicide tactics remained significant. Naval weapons experts discovered that kamikaze attacks created unique engagement conditions that challenged proximity-fuzed effectiveness. Suicide aircraft typically approached from close range at high speed, reducing the time available for multiple engagement opportunities. The rapid rate of change in target range made fire control calculations difficult, even with proximity-fuzed ammunition. The U.S. Navy responded to the kamikaze threat through the establishment of specialized organizations, including the Anti-Aircraft Operations Research Group and the Special Defense Section of the Pacific Fleet Staff. These units developed new doctrine, tactics, and procedures specifically designed to maximize proximity-fuzed effectiveness against suicide attacks, demonstrating the Navy's systematic approach to solving tactical problems through technological and procedural innovation. Admiral Willis Ching Lee led Task Force 69, specifically created to test improved anti-kamikaze tactics and equipment. The task force included converted battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and specialized aircraft to evaluate new weapons and procedures under simulated combat conditions. This systematic approach to tactical development exemplified American military innovation under wartime pressure. The Okinawa campaign provided the definitive test of proximity-fuzed technology against massed kamikaze attacks. During the 82-day battle, Japanese forces launched 10 major Kikusui floating chrysanthemum attacks involving hundreds of suicide aircraft. American ships equipped with proximity-fuzed ammunition achieved significantly better survival rates than those using conventional anti-aircraft ammunition. Combat statistics from Okinawa demonstrated both the effectiveness of proximity fuses and the determination of kamikaze attackers. Of 149 Allied ships hit or damaged by kamikaze attacks, destroyer-type vessels suffered disproportionate casualties due to their exposed radar picket positions. However, ships equipped with full proximity-fuse ammunition loads achieved markedly better defensive records than those using conventional shells. The strategic impact of proximity-fuse technology against kamikaze attacks helped prevent the collapse of American offensive operations in the Pacific. While kamikaze attacks sank 45 Allied ships and damaged hundreds more, the casualties would have been catastrophically higher without proximity-fuzed anti-aircraft ammunition. The technology that had begun as an anti-aircraft improvement became essential for military survival against weaponized suicide. The complete solution represented by proximity-fuse technology against kamikaze attacks demonstrated that American industrial and technological capabilities could adapt to counter even the most desperate enemy innovations, maintaining the strategic initiative through engineering excellence applied to specific combat challenges. The deployment of proximity-fuzes created measurable transformation in Pacific naval warfare effectiveness that could be quantified through combat statistics. Night-kill ratios increased by 370% compared to conventional ammunition, while overall anti-aircraft effectiveness improved by factors of 3 to 4 times. Ships equipped with proximity-fuzed ammunition reported confidence levels among crew members that translated into improved combat performance across all ship operations. During the final year of the Pacific War, proximity-fused technology helped limit kamikaze effectiveness despite the massive scale of Japanese suicide attacks. From October 1944 through August 1945, Japanese forces conducted approximately 2,550 kamikaze missions, with only 475, 18.6%, achieving hits or damaging near misses. While this success rate remained dangerously high, it represented significant improvement over earlier engagements using conventional anti-aircraft ammunition. Comparative analysis of ship damage revealed the protective value of proximity-fused technology during major operations. At Okinawa, where kamikaze attacks reached peak intensity, ships equipped with full proximity-fuse ammunition loads suffered significantly lower casualty rates than vessels using conventional shells. The technology that had seemed experimental in 1943 had become essential for survival against enemy forces, willing to sacrifice themselves for tactical advantage. The psychological transformation among American naval personnel was measurable through morale reports and combat effectiveness assessments. Gun crews who had previously approached air attacks with appropriate caution now actively sought engagement opportunities, confident in their weapons' effectiveness. This change in attitude translated into improved reaction times and more aggressive defensive tactics that multiplied the technological advantages of proximity-fuse ammunition. Production statistics demonstrated American industrial capacity applied to wartime requirements on unprecedented scales. By war's end, American factories were producing 70,000 proximity-fuzes daily, involving 80,000 workers across 87 companies using 110 factories nationwide. The manufacturing achievement represented one of the most complex mass production efforts in industrial history, creating electronic devices more sophisticated than contemporary aircraft in artillery shell formats. The strategic implications of proximity-fuse effectiveness extended to Japanese military planning, where captured documents revealed growing desperation about countering American technological advantages. Japanese aviation units that had once approached American ships with confidence now faced defensive fire so accurate that mission success required accepting near-certain death. This psychological pressure influenced Japanese tactical development throughout the final year of war. The final statistics of proximity-fuse effectiveness against kamikaze attacks were demonstrated in the war's closing days. USS Helena became the last American ship sunk by kamikaze attack on July 28, 1945, while USS Cassin Young and USS Horace A. Bass were the last ships damaged by suicide attacks on July 29, 1945. These final attacks showed both the persistence of the kamikaze threat and the effectiveness of proximity-fused defenses in limiting casualties. Admiral Mark Mitchell's assessment captured the strategic significance of proximity-fused technology. The weapons had knocked down enemy planes by the dozens and prevented ship losses and casualties that would have been enormously larger without the electronic ammunition. This technological superiority had been achieved through systematic engineering applied to specific combat problems, rather than conventional military approaches. The broader implications of proximity-fused success extended beyond immediate military applications to demonstrate principles of technological warfare that would influence defense planning for decades. The shells had proven that electronic guidance systems could achieve strategic objectives through precision rather than mass, establishing foundations for modern smart weapons technology. The immediate transformation created by proximity-fused deployment represented validation of American technological and industrial supremacy applied to warfare, achieving decisive advantages through engineering excellence that enemy forces could neither match nor effectively counter with available resources. The systematic deployment of proximity-fuzes across the entire Pacific Fleet created cascading advantages that extended far beyond improved anti-aircraft effectiveness. Ships equipped with reliable proximity-fuzzed ammunition could operate with reduced escort requirements, allowing American naval forces to concentrate offensive power rather than dispersing units for defensive purposes. This tactical flexibility accelerated offensive operations throughout the Pacific theater. The strategic implications of proximity-fused technology reached the highest levels of Allied command. Vannevar Bush, head of the U.S. Office of Scientific Research and Development, credited proximity-fuzes with three significant effects: decisive improvement in defense against kamikaze attacks, neutralization of German V-1 attacks on England, and transformation of land warfare through improved artillery effectiveness. The technology had achieved strategic impacts across multiple theaters of operation. Admiral Lewis Strauss wrote that proximity fuses represented one of the most original and effective military developments in World War II that must be listed among the very small group of developments, such as radar, upon which victory very largely depended. This assessment placed proximity-fused technology among the war-winning innovations that determined the conflict's outcome through technological superiority rather than numerical advantage. The compound effects of proximity-fused deployment became evident in Japanese strategic planning, where military leaders concluded that conventional air attacks against American naval forces were no longer viable. Japanese aviation units lost 3,912 kamikaze pilots without successfully sinking any American fleet carriers, cruisers, or battleships, a catastrophic exchange ratio that demonstrated the effectiveness of American technological countermeasures. Intelligence analysis revealed the psychological impact of proximity-fused technology on Japanese aviation personnel, who reported that American shells appeared to pursue individual aircraft. Several Japanese aviation units requested transfer to ground combat roles rather than face American anti-aircraft defenses that had achieved near invulnerability through technological means rather than numerical superiority. The industrial implications of proximity-fused production demonstrated American manufacturing supremacy on scales that no other nation could match. The program eventually employed over 80,000 workers, producing electronic devices that contained more sophisticated components than contemporary aircraft, packaged into artillery shells that functioned reliably under extreme combat conditions. This achievement represented industrial capability that enemy forces could not replicate even with complete knowledge of the technology. The escalating success of proximity-fused technology forced Japanese military planners to abandon conventional air warfare tactics entirely. By 1945, Japanese aviation doctrine focused exclusively on suicide attacks, acknowledging that traditional bombing and torpedo missions could not overcome American anti-aircraft defenses. This tactical capitulation represented strategic victory achieved through technological dominance. The operational advantages created by proximity-fused deployment multiplied beyond direct defensive benefits. American carrier forces could conduct continuous operations without the defensive restrictions that had previously limited offensive tempo. Aircraft launch and recovery operations continued during enemy air attacks, dramatically increasing sortie rates and operational effectiveness throughout the Pacific campaign. The final phase of proximity-fuse effectiveness was demonstrated during the planning for Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan. Military planners estimated that Japanese forces had prepared over 10,000 aircraft for kamikaze attacks against invasion forces, but proximity-fused technology had proven capable of neutralizing such threats with acceptable casualties. The weapons that had begun as anti-aircraft improvements had evolved into strategic capabilities that made invasion of Japan militarily feasible. The systematic domination achieved through proximity-fused technology established principles of electronic warfare that would influence military development throughout the Cold War and beyond. The shells had demonstrated that precision guidance systems could achieve strategic objectives more effectively than conventional approaches, creating foundations for modern smart weapons technology that continues to define military superiority through technological advancement. The escalating success of proximity-fused deployment had transformed the Pacific War from contested aerial warfare to American technological demonstration, proving that systematic engineering applied to specific combat problems could achieve decisive strategic advantages that enemy forces could neither counter nor replicate. The complete success of proximity-fused technology against Japanese air attacks achieved strategic victory through technological superiority that influenced the war's conclusion. By August 1945, American naval forces, equipped with proximity-fuzed ammunition, had achieved practical invulnerability against conventional air attacks, while significantly reducing casualties from kamikaze operations. This technological achievement contributed to Japanese recognition that continued resistance was futile against enemies possessing overwhelming industrial and technological advantages. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that proximity fuses represented one of the most decisive technological developments of World War II. The weapons had achieved strategic objectives that conventional military force could not accomplish alone, neutralizing enemy air power through precision rather than mass, demonstrating industrial capabilities that no adversary could match, and establishing technological principles that would define post-war military competition. The final statistics of proximity, fuse production, and effectiveness demonstrated American industrial supremacy applied to warfare on unprecedented scales. Over 22 million proximity fuses were manufactured during the war at a cost exceeding $1 billion in 1940s currency, employing technologies that required precision assembly of 130 electronic components per shell. This achievement represented the largest and most complex military electronics program in history to that date. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal summarized the strategic impact. The proximity fuse has helped blaze the trail to Japan. The technology had not simply improved American defensive capabilities, it had created offensive advantages that accelerated victory while reducing casualties through technological rather than numerical superiority. This approach would influence American military doctrine throughout the Cold War period. General George Patton's assessment of proximity fuse effectiveness in European operations captured the weapon's transformative impact. The new shell with the funny fuse is devastating. I think that when all armies get this shell, we will have to devise some new method of warfare. This prediction proved accurate, as proximity guidance technology evolved into the smart weapons systems that define modern military superiority. The strategic consequences of proximity fuse technology extended beyond immediate military applications to influence post-war strategic planning. The weapons had demonstrated that technological development could achieve decisive advantages over numerically superior enemies, establishing precedents for defense investment priorities that would characterize American strategic policy throughout the nuclear age. The lasting legacy of proximity fuse development established institutional frameworks for military technology innovation that continue to influence defense, research, and development. The Applied Physics Laboratory at Johns Hopkins University, created specifically for proximity fuse development, became a model for government-industry-university cooperation in advanced weapons development that remains central to American defense technology innovation. The broader implications of proximity fuse success validated systematic approaches to solving complex military problems through coordinated research, development, and production efforts. The program had proven that American industrial capacity could be rapidly adapted to produce sophisticated weapons systems that provided decisive advantages over enemies relying on conventional military approaches. Intelligence analysis revealed that proximity fuse technology had created psychological effects on enemy forces that exceeded direct military impact. Japanese military personnel developed what could be termed technological despair, recognition that American engineering capabilities had advanced beyond their ability to counter effectively through available means. This psychological dimension of technological warfare would become increasingly important in post-war strategic competition. The ultimate victory achieved through proximity Fuse technology demonstrated the decisive potential of electronic guidance systems applied to warfare. The shells had proven that precision guidance could achieve strategic objectives more effectively than conventional military force, establishing foundations for modern precision weapons that continue to provide decisive advantages through technological superiority rather than numerical supremacy. Admiral Arleigh Burke's final assessment captured the transformative nature of proximity-fuzed technology. The weapons had knocked down enemy planes by the dozens, while preventing casualties that would have been enormously larger without electronic ammunition. This achievement represented the perfect synthesis of American technological capability and military necessity, creating decisive advantages through systematic engineering applied to specific combat challenges. The proximity fuse represented the ultimate validation of American technological and industrial supremacy applied to warfare, a revolutionary weapon system that achieved strategic victory through precision guidance technology that enemy forces could neither match nor effectively counter, establishing principles of electronic warfare that continue to define military superiority in the modern era.